Okay, guys, perfect. I'm glad you're on. I'm really sorry for the late start after some car drama on the roads in here getting bumped. So what I'll do is I'll not waste any more time. I'll play you guys this recording, which has got loads of videos, loads of insights into sort of how to manage sort of some taping strategies, give you some insights into the way that we'd use strapping in practice. So without further ado, what I'll do is I'll share this with you. Go from here. Enjoy. Okay, guys, welcome back to another session with me, Steve Miller. We're going to run through the sport taping tutorial today. So really going through the fundamental principles that you guys will require in order to apply taping yourself. So it's a bit of a mishmash of some of my experiences that I've worked on. We're going to go through an ankle strapping, and I'm going to talk you through that process and some of the materials. If you are interested, there is a QR code there that you can see to access the full taping masterclass online. All you just need to do is just literally scan it. It'll send you to the page on the Grow Physio Academy, pay for it and go from there. So this is what we're going to focus in on. So for anything that you're going to strap, you really need to know your anatomy, the injury mechanism, so you can try and prevent that same motion occurring. We'll talk you through the preparations that you go through before even applying some taping, and then that step-by-step process that you'll need in order to go through and administer your own strapping techniques. That's the same process that you rinse and repeat. And it just depends on which body part you're trying to do and how much support you want. And then also thinking about the sort of wider impacts biomechanics wise from there. We'll talk through the materials and the adjuncts that you will require. As I say, the ankle strapping is what I'm going to focus in on. I think everybody should, as a bare minimum, be able to strap an ankle. So this is what we'll cover today, as well as a couple of the other little dynamic taping introductions. Just so you know a little bit about my background on here, so I've worked in various different places, mainly rugby for about sort of 12, 13 years, so tons and tons of strapping. The video that you can see here is the courses that I run, face-to-face practical courses, so if you do want to get in touch or want to attend any of these, just check out the Grow Physio Academy. It'll have the dates and lists, and if you want me to come out to you, just drop me an email or contact me via socials. But the worlds that I work in at the moment in British Judo, sort of preparing our athletes for the Paris Olympics as we stand at the moment, there's a lot of strapping that goes on in this world, a lot of strapping in judo, a lot of strapping in British gymnastics as well. So hopefully I'll share some of those with you. So the taping process is fairly standard. So we'll prepare the area, as in whatever it is that body part wise that you're looking after, make sure that you don't have any dirt or grime or anything, no creams, etc. on. And then really what we need to do is think about positioning the joint to give it the most anatomical advantage. So when we are talking about a classic inversion sprain at the ankle, thinking that the mechanism that ATFL will tear in is plantar flexion plus inversion. If you've just got the inversion part in more of a neutral position, you may involve that CFL, or you may get a little combination of the two. If we then look at how and where we position that, it's really important, isn't it, to make sure we don't strap it in that plantar flexed inverted position, because actually, if we do that, we're not going to get as much purchase from the tape, and therefore it's going to fall into that position, and then therefore we may get some re-injury, reoccurrence, re-irritation from there. Little terminology bits, we'll talk about anchors in a second. We need to apply an anchor. In essence, an anchor is just something for the tape to stick onto. Usually what you'll use is something like a zinc oxide or even something like a hyperfix, like a more sticky equivalent really. Just means the tape will adhere better to the skin if it's sticking onto another piece of tape. Then what we need to do is think about the application angle and the tension that we're going to apply that at. So the more significant or more advanced levels of support that we want, really what we're looking at is trying to put that in the most offloaded position, and then maybe adding a little bit of tension into the tape from there. When we have zinc, you can almost alter the joint position as you pull onto it. If we have something like an EAB or a tear light, again, we can increase the amount of compression. We just have to be very careful that we don't just occlude anything. Next thing just to consider is you're not going to use just one strip of tape the vast majority of the time. So in terms of overlapping, I'd usually recommend 25 to 75% overlap depending on how much support you need. Major thing really with that is just ensuring that you don't have little gaps in between the tape, so therefore the skin will fall through, it'll get pinched, it'll tear, and it'll become very sore. And just lastly, once it's all in, if you have done any circumferential strapping or compressed everything, then do make sure that you aren't causing pins and needles, any tingles, any change in discoloration, any sort of checks like your sort of cap refills would be really useful to do just to make sure you've still got enough blood flowing in there. Likelihood is the tape will loosen off a little bit as they start to move. But yeah, when you're letting them loose, just make sure that they have neurovascular status in check. Couple of bits of terminology again, as I mentioned before, the anchors, usually for the ankle, they'll just be somewhere between the back of that Achilles and the base or the sort of distal end of that calf. Make sure you've got enough space for your tape to stick onto. You don't want it so far down around that malleoli that you haven't got enough purchase. Similarly, you don't want it affecting the function of that calf. Stirrups, named duly because of the sort of horse-related stirrups that you would have that you put your feet in. Basically, you're just creating that exact same thing from there. So you're often going from the medial to the lateral aspect to apply those stirrups. And again, if we talk about dynamic or kinesio taping options, what that is a slightly more flexible tape. It's a little bit more maneuverable and usually used to offer less of a stability element, but a little bit more of an increase in proprioception. Potential theories around sort of facilitating or initiating some muscles. I think for me, it's more that proprioceptive feedback. Along with proprioception, we have a number of other reasons why people may request taping. So it might be correcting biomechanics, external support, psychological or superstitious reasons that people want to wear that tape. It might improve the anatomical advantage that we said. So if a ligament that you are trying to protect, we need to think about what position that will get injured in and go almost into a position that offloads it. That'll come with reduced pain. This is the big one, the sort of proprioception side of things, fashions, improved performance, etc. So what does it look like when they come to see us, really? So when we go to tape someone, if they've walked through a dirty changing room, they'll often look like the picture on the left-hand side, won't they? They'll have grubby feet, they'll jump up, and then you'll almost need to pat them down with a little sock, dust off all the grime and grit and whatever else is there, and then you've got a surface that's there. If you lock all of those little particles in, obviously they'll rub, potentially cause blisters, and go from there. If they have moisturized in the morning or they've just had a massage, again, we need to be a little bit mindful in terms of what that skin adhesion is like. So make sure you wash off with soap or fairy liquid or something like that to make sure that you take off any creams, lotions, moisturizers, etc. Otherwise, that tape just won't stick very well. In terms of prep as well, the other thing that you can use in the top right-hand corner, you can see there is an adhesion spray, like a pre-tape spray. So what you do is it's a glue spray. So you cover the area with a thin coating, let it become a little bit tacky, and then apply the tape on. So if they are hairy or they're going to get sweaty, or if it's a foot and ankle, these are really nice little options just to make sure it stays on. Your foot and ankle is a little different, that you are going to have a sock that's going to cover it. So you may or may not decide to use this, but really useful around knees or shoulders and places like that, really. Very few contraindications. Obviously, if you're allergic to plasters, you've got any sort of malignancy sites, cellulitis, skin infections, open wounds, DVTs, etc. We just obviously need to make sure that we are looking after that skin appropriately, as well as thinking about the main one being sort of diabetics. If they can't feel that area very well and you are occluding something, or you're potentially going to cause an irritation to the skin when you rip the tape off, again, they're all sort of increased risk factors for your diabetics that are worth being mindful of. It might be that you need to use some alternative like a brace or support or something from there. If you do have little cuts, it doesn't mean that you can't tape someone, but what I would recommend is this, just making sure you use a blister pad or a square just to make sure that you cover that area. These squares are quite good. If you haven't seen these before, they're sort of 1 centimetre by 1 centimetre little gel pads, if you like. You can build them up one on top of the other, cover as big or as smaller as an area as you want. And just on that, I would just make sure that when you apply taping, particularly onto a weight-bearing area, you try and avoid any creases that may occur. These are the materials that we're going to talk through in a second. So you've got your zincs on the brown, which is that sort of tiger tan tape. In the bottom below that, you've got your taillight strappings that have got a little bit more give. Then top right, you've got your EAB strapping and elastic adhesive bandaging. Really good for kind of locking things in, those two. And then you've got your Hyperfix underneath. What I would finally recommend before going through the actual taping in a bit more detail is just make sure that this is vital, really. So if you are working with a team or you're new to taping, try and make life as easy as you can for yourself. So do prepare everything best that you can. Make sure that everything is laid out. I would make sure you've got multiple pairs of scissors, one which definitely stays with you because they will go all over the changing room, get lost, and then you're kind of frantically trying to find a pair of scissors. These bandage scissors are brilliant, much, much better than a standard set of scissors, just because of the fact that they won't dig into the skin when you try to take it off. And I would just try and keep things as easy and do as many pre-cuts as you possibly can. You can see just at the bottom on the right hand side there, all the Hyperfix is just cut for the ankle, and you'll see where in a second. So if I take you through the types of strapping options that you have and some of the adjuncts, really, it'll give you a better flavour in terms of what you need to do. All of these products are from Physique. Physique have supported and delivered all the taping products for us in gymnastics, in judo, in Newcastle Falcons, Rugby Premiership, Rugby Worlds. I know they do lots of stuff in football. They are an amazing company. Genuinely, I don't decide who we use, but they are definitely the best quality that I've used. If you want to get products from them, you can use my discount code, which is GrowPhysio on the Physique website. But here is the introduction to some of those materials.
So what I'd like to do is just introduce you to some of the products and the materials that you might find in a strapping environment. So hopefully when you go to strap an athlete, you're a little bit more familiar with at least the products. Now, all of these products are supplied by Physique or Physique Management, who we use for our 6 seasons that I spent at Newcastle Falcons, and always found them a great quality product. So if we start over on the sort of left-hand side, really, so this is just an adhesive glue. So what you might find is that with a hairy athlete or a sweaty athlete, or it's raining, or they potentially are involved in sort of swimming, you may well need something like an adhesive glue that just gives a little bit more tactile property to the tape, so it lasts a little bit longer. You'll always find that tape feels really tight initially, and then once the athlete is warmed up in it, it's normally a more true account as to how that's going to feel during a game or a sort of sporting environment, really. So then if we come on to the zinc oxide strapping. So if you are strapping someone, have a little think about what you're trying to achieve. If you want to achieve stability in that joint, particularly zinc oxide is quite a good place to start. So it comes in 2 forms, really. So this one is a tiger tan strapping. This one is, again, just a white zinc oxide. We always use the tiger tan at Newcastle Falcons because I find it's a much better quality product. The difference, really, is that the tiger tan is a lot thicker in terms of its properties, so it's a lot more adhesive. It seems to give a lot more support to the athletes, and the feedback from them when you compare them, they're chalk and cheese, really. If you look at how easily this comes off the roll here, it just slides off, and the quality of it, you can almost see the thread count isn't anywhere near as high. So if you want to really stabilise a joint, zinc oxide is probably your way to go. I would always opt with this, which is like a tiger tan taping instead. Much better for adhesion, much better stability. It does come in different sizes, so that is probably the one which we use the most, which is about a 38mm. You can get a 2 centimetre or sort of 18mm version. That one would usually use for sort of toe strappings. And then this, if anyone asks, is a finger strapping. So this is about 1 centimetre, just under 1 centimetre thick, exactly the same properties. Players will typically apply this onto their own fingers, body strapping, that sort of thing. Then if we come on to your EAB, so your elastic adhesive bandages. So these, again, come in different sizes. They are more typically used as an overwrap over the top of something like a zinc to hold it all in place, but you can use this in isolation on its own. So if we look again at how that comes off the roll, there's a little bit of elastic nature to it. So it does have a little bit of give and a little bit of recoil. Now again, the quality of this product is excellent, but some you may find that again the thread count on them is a little bit different, which again just means you're not going to have quite that support that you'd have with a higher quality product there. Again, this comes in 7.5 centimeters, which is this one, which we normally use for things maybe like a bigger foot and ankle. We might use this to lock in some shoulders. And by comparison, you've got exactly the same product in a 5 centimeter range, which we usually use for wrists, heads, and maybe some smaller feet and ankles really. This you struggle to tear. You can tear it, but it often ends up unraveling and it ends up a bit of a mess. So you may well have to use some scissors to do that. Now there's a couple of different options that you have. You can obviously use something, just an off-the-shelf scissor for cutting things away from an athlete. These two are medical scissors or bandage scissors. This is a more bandage-related scissor. They're generally a little bit more flimsy, but they're sharper often in the actual blade themselves. And you may be able to see from there, they've got a slight little ridge here. So if you are cutting it near skin, you've got plenty of protection. I much prefer these ones. They're a lot more robust. Again, it has that little sort of snout or spout really that's on here, like a little plateau that you can get underneath the tape if you ever get to the point where you need to cut taping off, which is a formality in sport really. So I much prefer those. The other sizes that it tends to come in is this size, again just over 1 centimeter really. Sort of this is what we use for thumbs predominantly. So if you had sort of gamekeeper thumbs, any issues around here, really nice to loop it around fingers and then secure that around the wrist. The other types of strapping that you can have are what are called tear-light strappings. And this is an example of one of those really. So you can see it's much thinner, the thread count's much less, and there's much more give than there is on an EAB strapping. Now these are probably less adhesive, but they adhere to themselves, which is a massive advantage. The other thing you can often use is like a vet tape or a horse tape, which is also really nice to snug joints in place. But again, this is a really useful product. Don't apply it with tension. Is a bit of a learning point, because when it recoils, it will then potentially occlude sort of vascular neural tissue as you do that. But again, a lovely little strapping. Some footballers may only want something like this around ankles and things, so it's more a proprioceptive thing with a little bit of compression really, just so they don't feel like they're limited. The other thing that you will come across undoubtedly is something called Hyperfix. Now this is Hyperfix here. Now this is a really adhesive, sticky backed product, and what you use it for is almost like an underlay in preparation, usually for zinc oxide. So if I just cut a little bit just to show you, where you are here, the actual taping is underneath, so it's not sticky on either side, but what you need to do is expose the adhesive side of the strapping. So what you're going to do is almost separate the two bits here, so then the two bits of paper come apart, and then all you're going to do is just literally unravel that, and again do exactly the same on the other side. So then what we have is a sticky side and a totally unsticky side on this. You can lay that onto an athlete, particularly if they're hairy. Really useful to, again, can adhere to itself, so you can create a circumferential anchor for a lot of tape to stick onto. So that's really useful. That is the 5 centimeter version, which again we'd use a lot for ankles, maybe little smaller joints, and then you've got the alternative, which is just a bigger 7.5 centimeter version really with this. So it's exactly the same. It has the option to separate the two bits of paper, which reveals that adhesive surface. And again, this would be ideal for anyone to sort of put over shoulders to create, again, a platform that you can put anchors on to then sort of stabilize things like instability, subluxations, any AC joint issues, things like that. Going on to more dynamic taping options really, so you've got kinesio tape, K-tape, dynamic tape, they all predominantly do exactly the same thing, but they just come in different formats. So if I just sort of introduce that, really you can get what we used, which was a huge roll of K-tape, and then we would just cut that to whatever size we wanted, and then we could potentially cut into it, we'd round the edges just to make sure that it doesn't come unstuck. And again, exactly like the Hyperfix, it's got a paper layer underneath. And what you normally do is almost rip the paper underneath, so then you can apply the taping. Now what you're then going to do is almost try and avoid touching the back of this, because it's not very adhesive and loses that stickiness. And you're going to unravel that to the point where you can actually unpeel that, and then you can apply that with whatever degree, percentage-wise of strapping that you may want to apply to that athlete. Really useful to give a little bit of proprioceptive feedback, a little bit of assistance, and maybe as that athlete goes into maybe a more vulnerable soft tissue position, say like a hamstring, in that hip flex, knee extended position, ideally if you put that on stretch, then what's going to happen again, it's going to recoil slightly and give that athlete a little bit more proprioceptive feedback. Now, the products are predominantly the same, exactly the same as the other products down here. The more expensive, usually the better the thread count is. It depends on what you want to achieve. You can buy pre-cuts. Now, this limits you in some respects. So, little pre-cuts that you've got here. Again, some of them have then got an additional cut in there, so you may well be able to tear that. So for easy application, what you might decide to do is you almost put your anchor down, apply the stretch in this position, and then you can almost engulf a joint or a bit of soft tissue really to get a little bit more input. So that's your other option with those. You can buy them in all different types of packs. Again, it might be that athletes have presented to you and they said, I bought an ankle pack, can you just apply it? And it might be for an Achilles, for example, in this case. So here we've got the Achilles sort of K-tape pack, which again, everything's pre-cut. It's not bespoke to the athlete. So that's why I much prefer cutting my own. But unless you're going to use that in large amounts, it's probably not worth it. In terms of removing the strapping, once that's all applied and you've got it all locked in, what you may opt to use, which some people like, are, again, the bandage scissors that are here. The other thing is something called a shark, and what it is almost a blade. So almost what you do is put this layer of the blade against the athlete's skin and slide that up the line of the taping itself. That will beautifully cut through zinc oxide taping. It battles a little bit with this EAB, but generally that's the best way to take the strapping off if you want to do it quickly and effectively. Once it's off, what the athlete often complains about is if you've particularly used an adhesive glue or you've used a lot of zinc oxide onto the skin itself, is it feels a bit claggy and a bit sticky. And they struggle with shampoos to take that off in the shower. So little tips for you for that is either use something just like a massage cream to take that off. You can use something like a sort of hand sanitizer, is often quite useful. And again, that helps to just remove any of that glue that's maybe adhesed onto the skin and is annoying that athlete. So that's it really. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of all the different products that you might come across in a sporting environment. It totally depends on what you are trying to achieve. If it's stability, zinc oxides are brilliant. It might be that you need to use something like a Hyperfix underneath just to provide a better platform for that. You might want to reinforce that with something a bit more rigid like an EAB strapping. Or if you just want something lighter like a tear light, that's a lovely option as well. If you want something more dynamic that the athlete feels even less restricted with, particularly for soft tissue injuries rather than maybe the more joint related problems, your dynamic taping is probably the option to go for.
There you go. So the last couple of things just to give you an indicator on before we get into the taping itself is these options really. So you do have foam or felt padding, which can be used underneath. So for something like a contusion injury, quad, dead leg, something like that. Obviously, you can build those layers up. We have in the past used a thermoplastic, which you can see top left in there. Really, what it is are sheets of thermoplastic. You put them into boiling water, they become transparent, and you can mold them around certain areas. So we often have a layer of the foam, have the thermoplastic over the top, just to give something a chance underneath, just to settle down, really. Illegal in matches, but we generally tend to use them in training to protect something. And the other couple of things that you can sort of see at the bottom there, Muller do these great things called dermal pads. They're a little bit like a sort of an animal fat sort of material substance, really, and what you can do is just add them on. They're fine to wear in competition. They're a bit more like a jelly, but again, they just absorb a little bit of that impact. If there is a direct knock onto something that's bruised or swollen or irritated underneath, it can be very sore for the athlete, so they can be used as needed. This is just the couple of things that I mentioned in that previous video. So the shark is the little black contraption that's at the bottom there. You can see the blade just sitting in between the teeth there. And then you've got the bandage scissors. Now, I have in the past used these little clever cutters. They are things that Amazon drivers generally use just to kind of open up parcels and things like that. Do be a little bit careful. I did hear a bit of a horror story where someone just sliced straight through themselves with that. So just be a little bit careful. Definitely try and use the actual products intended for what's required. And these are the little sprays, tape fix remover, WD-40s, not particularly great on the skin, but again, they're not bad options just to get rid of that annoying glue if it does stick. So I just thought I'd give you a quick insight into sort of what an ankle injury may look like. So when we have an inversion injury, you can see the ATFL and CFL go under undue stress there. Body weight comes over, trunk position, not correct. He ends up with an ATFL and CFL rupture in this incident. So you can sort of see those two ligaments, the anterior talofibular ligament and the calcaneofibular ligament on the diagram at the top. But you can see as they roll, as they come through their rehabilitation process, and you've ticked off all your markers in terms of sort of the restored their strength, their proprioception, their balance, their stability, their explosive nature, their abilities to accelerate, decelerate, change direction, etc. in rehab, you may also want to add an extra layer of protection when you go into competition. I generally don't use taping during my rehab process because I get a better indicator as to where they are, but everyone each to their own, really. You can do, it's up to you, but I would say if you've got a solid robust rehab program and you go through that, then you shouldn't really require the taping. However, we have used it in the past for psychological and for that extra physical layer. So I'll talk you through this. Hope you enjoy. These are a various different sort of menu of options that you can use, and then I'll come back and talk you through the sort of syndesmosis taping after that.
So if we take you through an ankle strapping, there's a lot of different variations that you can use to try and give stability around the lateral aspect of that ankle, and we'll try and cover some of those now. Now, in terms of preparation, you always find that the athlete's got a fair bit of fluff or dirt and things on there. You may want to use a pre-tape spray. You may need to use an under wrap for this. It will vary depending on the severity of the injury in terms of which technique that you find most useful. Now, regardless of the technique, what I'd always use is something to try and prevent any sort of blisters occurring. So, majority of the compression from the tape will usually occur across the anterior aspect or at the back of that Achilles. So, if we allow that, just relax your foot slightly, just so the tendons of that tibia chill out. Apply the tape just over the front of that ankle. And then we're going to do exactly the same across the back. So, where the ankle tends to hinge, just at the base of that Achilles, we're just laying on the hyperfix, just because the zinc oxide may well cut into that a little bit during that. Now when you tape, what I do is just almost have them in a plantar grade position here, because obviously the mechanism of injury is usually into that inversion and plantar flex position, bringing in that ATFL. So put them in a neutral position. If they're really sore, what you may need to do is almost start them in some eversion in there. Now, zinc oxide's the predominant go-to with this. In terms of anchors, you may want to use something like Hyperfix, or you might want to use even like a tail-like strapping and just apply it on. Just for ease here, what we'll do is almost apply an anchor now. Give yourself enough room, so the longer your stirrups are, the more pull that you'll have to work with. So apply that there. I normally tape just outer so I can then allow the tape just to sit on there. So there's no tension onto that region. So same again, you'll always get a bit of an idea, let it fall, and then drop in here. So then you've got something for the tape to stick onto. Now, you're going to go from a medial to a lateral angle. Start medially, sort of going over that medial malleolus or even slightly behind. Fix down, and then depending on the degree of injury and how much restriction you want to give, as you come up the lateral aspect, you can apply as much pull or just allow the tape to lay on there. So tear it off, stabilize it here, pin it down, and just make sure you stick it down so there's no creases. What you're going to do is just build that up. So give yourself 4 or 5 mil in between each one. And what you start to end up with is almost like a V formation. So you're gradually working your way inwards to give a little bit of stability. So these are what are deemed stirrups. And once you get to the middle, that's usually when I'm pretty happy. Now, you don't want to encroach too much into the sole of the foot, because as that drives into the foot, it can be quite sore if you've got a running athlete. Now, you've got various other different options in terms of building that up if the athlete wants them. They may say they want some 6s. If they want a 6, what I do is just start almost slightly anterior to that lateral malleolus, come across, go underneath the foot in the same angulation, and then you're just pulling up and across. Again, pin that down again. So just to show you that again, you're going to start almost slightly anterior, almost thinking about the location of that ATFL, come across, come underneath, again not encroaching too high, and then pulling into a 6-shaped position. So that's a 6 if someone asks for 6s. The other thing that you can do is almost add an 8. So for this one, you're going to start much higher, come across the anterior aspect of the medial malleolus, coming across here, and then across the anterior aspect there. So you're actually creating a cross across the front of the joint. Just to show you that one again, so you're coming from a pretty high position, coming right across the anterior line there, and then coming around to then stabilise on that medial aspect. Now you can build up in addition some additional support around that lateral ligament complex. So for these ones, what you may want to do is just think about protecting certain structures. So you may want to put in some additional little strips. In whichever angle, be it ATFL or CFL, that needs a little bit more stability in there. Again, these are variations, you don't need to do all of these. If you want to, you can obviously come in a little bit further down and build that angulation up that way. Again, you can build up as many as you want to with that. The next thing that is almost a given is making sure you apply a heel lock. So for your heel lock, start on the anterolateral aspect, come behind the medial malleolus, come in behind here, and then what you're doing is coming underneath across the front of the medial malleolus, tearing off and fixing in the same angle. So just to show you that again. Any little bits of tape that you muck up, just tear it off, don't try and save it. Come in behind, up and under, and then you're finishing on the opposite side. Yeah, to show you that from the other angle, so you might want to start on the medial aspect this time. You're coming behind the lateral malleolus, round that calcaneus, and then up and across the front, or the anterior aspect, of that lateral malleoli. Then what you might want to do is just lock that off just to stop the little ends. So again, don't go circumferential. Build that up. Now the other thing that people might ask for is an anterior strip. So what that's doing is preventing the plantar flexion aspect of this. So what you might want to do then is go from a proximal perspective to distal and just lay on some additional anterior strips. So measure up. These can be quite restrictive. What you're going to do is apply that there and then just allow that to fall onto the athlete. Show you that again. Measure up. And then let it fall down. Often, if you're going to do these, you probably apply 3 across the front. And then again, just seal in the ends if they ask for it. Fix it all down, and then what you might need over the top is just something to support that. So go-to is that tail light strapping, and again, you're just going to lay that on. So take the tension out. It doesn't matter too much going across the front here, and you're just going to figure of 8 weave that. Finish medially, and then you may want to just stabilize that with a little bit of zinc oxide. So there are a wide variety of different techniques that you can use. You'd rarely use all of those. Pick and choose which ones are the most appropriate, and the athlete will guide you whether or not they're happy. It might be you try one, get them to go out running, see what they're like with a change of direction or running drills. If they like it, great. If they want some additional support, if there's too much support, just take off layers as you need.
So there's the final product there, really. Obviously, there's a lot of tape on there. So as I say, you won't use all of those. It might be something as simple and as basic as a couple of stirrups and a couple of heel locks that you have, and then maybe wrapping it in. Footballers will obviously like different bits and pieces. They may just like that tail light, and that might be all you get away with, so they can still play their passes. Now, just on a slight side note, really, if you do have an acute ankle injury and you assess it and you sort of see that classic egg-shaped swelling, you'll usually find that there's more swelling the first time they injure rather than the recurrent episodes. So don't be sort of too alarmed if there's a sort of a small mechanism but a lot of swelling. Now, swelling for me is obviously an important part, or the inflammation is an important part in terms of catalyzing that healing. However, if you end up with so much swelling that's down near that ankle, it can become a little bit difficult to move that later on. So I try and control the amount of swelling that there is, just so later on down the line, because of gravity dropping everything south, we actually can get on top of that a little bit better. So this is one option that you can do. You can use a horseshoe made of sort of felt or foam padding really around that lateral malleoli. It adds an extra little layer of compression, and then we're just wrapping over the top of that with that sort of tail light to add a bit of compression. So the compression, again, sort of has long term been part of that sort of rice, price, police and harm process really. So that compression really important really with there. You can see on the right hand side what it may look like. So you get that classic indentation. So if there's been a lot of swelling, you might find that it controls it. You might get a little bit of bruising tracking elsewhere, but you're trying to just control the massive amount of sort of import of fluid that's into that area. The other ankle injury that you may well come across really typically missed this one and not managed as effectively as it should be. I've been burnt with this in the past, trying to rush to try and get dorsiflexion and range of motion back. You definitely don't want that. Initially, you want to try and limit the amount of dorsiflexion and external rotation that you have in and around there, because it just irritates and disturbs that healing of that syndesmotic ligament complex on there. So the mechanism's different. This is a dorsiflexed plus rotated position, and the couple of strapping techniques that you can use that I've just borrowed a couple of my ex-colleagues at Newcastle Falcons Rugby Club, and you can sort of see the guy on the left hand side strapping one ankle slightly different to the guy on the right. The start's very similar though on both. So you've got your anchor that goes in above the ankle, you've then got your stirrups that kick in, and then this is where the variations come, isn't it? So you've got two different types of basket weave option that you can do from here. It generally works its way up gradually. You might be going 1-to-1 ratio, 1-to-2 ratio, 1-to-3 ratio. However you want to do that ratio between the stirrups and the basket weave is entirely up to you and that athlete. What it ends up creating is that lovely sort of gap at the front of the ankle that you can see on the left-hand side there. Normally what we'll do is make that window a little bit bigger as we allow a little bit more dorsiflexion. He's actually putting on some strips to prevent anterior or plantar flexion in that position with the anterior strips. But again, a couple of nice little variations that you can have a little play with in your clinic. We'll go through this. This is a lot more complicated to go through clearly, but there's a sort of step-by-step guide in the sort of full comprehensive ankle strapping and taping tutorial that we have on the Grow Physio Academy from there. This is the course itself. So what I've done is tried to put together all of the essential taping techniques that you require. So it goes through everything upper limb, right from shoulder, postural, neural problems, from subluxations, dislocations, AC joint problems, etc., down through into the elbow, into the wrist and hand, the thumb, the fingers, etc., and then everything lower limb as well. So if you are managing anyone in a team environment, you're going to need to strap a knee, so MCLs, ACLs, LCLs, meniscal support, patellar tendinopathies, patellar maltracking is all covered within this, along with the ankle strapping that you've just seen, plus the syndesmosis, plantar flexion, plantar fasciitis strappings, turf toes, anything that's going on in and around that foot that may well cause an issue. So I really recommend everybody doing this so you understand some of the principles, again, of taping other areas. It goes into a lot more depth on the anatomy side of things. And to access it, again, you can go to www.growphysioacademy.com or just scan that QR code that you can see on the right-hand side. I also run courses face-to-face as well as the online stuff. So you can see little clips from the online material, but we'll go through this in person. I think it's really useful to do this with a roll of tape in your hands and have someone that you can tape with. You can obviously kind of rewind and fast forward however you want to on the online stuff. But again, it's a really useful day. I'm always astounded that people can go in not having picked up a roll of tape ever, not knowing how to even unwrap it or kind of tear the tape in. And then they leave really quite competent with knowing all the sort of how to use the different taping, which taping strategies to pick, and then the applications of it as well. We can kind of go around and just amend and support you guys on that journey. So if you are interested, again, QR code is there. If you're interested in me coming out to see you, email me, steve@growphysioacademy.com, or the website's there, which has all of this information on that you can access at your leisure, www.growphysioacademy.com. So again, advantages of doing the full course: comprehensive upper and lower body applications, much better preparation and practical skill set. You'll explore the anatomy a little bit more of different injuries and the injury mechanisms that cause them. Look at the joint stability, biomechanical, posture and dynamic taping options as well. So there's good things on calf, hamstring, even sort of glute-related problems as well. Hopefully by the end of it, though, you feel a little bit more confident today. Obviously on the back of this, you need to practice. But again, to get good at everything, I would just suggest jump online, have a little look at those. If you are interested in other areas as well, the Grow Physio Academy has various different courses. So it tries to walk you through the theory, the assessment, the treatment, the rehabilitation, and then case studies of people that I've worked with, because it's something that I'm really passionate about. I didn't feel like I had any great support to go away or know where to go to get support when I was going to deal with sports injuries. So this is why I've created it. On top of that, COVID hit. On top of that, we didn't have any placements or student access to this world. So again, do have a little look on there, see what you can pick up. Tons of information there. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you have learned a little bit around the sports taping aspects. And do get in touch. Be great to hear from you and go from there. All the very best. Okay, folks, there you go. So there is a very quick insight into a little bit around taping, some of the things that go through my head when I'm looking at sort of taping something up. Is it appropriate? Is it potentially a conversation to have? How are we going to wean them off, etc., etc.? So I'm very happy to open up to any questions that anybody may have. So feel free to pop your mic on if you feel brave enough, or if you want to drop anything into the chat box question-wise, then again, very, very happy to answer anything that you have. The session will be recorded and I'll ping that out via a YouTube link as well. So if you did arrive a little bit late, again, apologies for me arriving a bit late, totally out of my control. We had a bit of drama beforehand, but really glad that I could still deliver it. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, oh, there we go, they're coming in. Do you usually use pre-wrap, or is it just personal preference? The only times I ever really use an under-wrap or a pre-wrap is if they specifically request it. If I'm doing it for people on a course, I will usually use it if they're hairy and avoid them getting irritation. If they have a really mild sort of allergy or allergic reaction to taping, I might, and they're adamant that they want to use it and they're not going to use a support, I'd probably lather a lot of that on, a good few layers to make sure that all of the skin is fully covered so they don't have any reaction at all. Ideally, you wouldn't use it at all if they've got any sort of reaction or sensitive skin or anything like that at all. Anything that is potentially like a little open wound, or there's a little cut or something that might be a little bit stirred up, again, are quite nice options to use the under wrap. But I would be genuinely, honestly, I hardly ever use it at all. Never use it around knees, particularly if you imagine something like rugby, where someone's grabbing and tackling someone around that knee. If you use an under wrap, it's going to end up down next to their ankle. So you might have a beautiful MCL strap in, or beautifully layered up. You've used under wrap, and then as soon as it gets kind of tugged on in the first 5 minutes, it's halfway down their shin, and then they just can't. They just don't get the benefit from it. So I do now and again, but very rarely now. Another question from Samuel. Hi, Steve. I can see your LAS taping technique is kind of different from the athletic trainers, American guys you do on YouTube. Could you explain a bit about your principle and perspective? Uh, I think that's LAS, it's the lateral ankle sprain. I don't know what the options that you've seen before are. There are so many ways that you can strap an ankle. Some people will do it with one piece of tape and they don't tear and they just do it as one continuation. For me, I find that when I'm trying to teach people, or even myself doing it, you end up with more creases. You've got to go, it's a bit less forgiving. So as you're going around some of the contours of the ankle, you're likely to get creases, areas that potentially bunch up a little bit. And it often feels really quite tight for the athlete. So I've opted for this as an option where I'm doing almost individual layers, and then I can add a little bit. They can assess, is that enough movement? Is that too restrictive? Do you feel like you need a little bit? And in what plane of motion do you feel like you need a little bit more? And then I just bespoke it from there, really. So yeah, I think that's probably something that you are referring to. Yeah, there are people who will do one continuation of strapping. It's a little bit like the sort of tear-like black strapping that you see over the top, but people will use the rigid taping or even like an EAB option with it. Again, not wrong, might be something that people absolutely love. You see quite a lot of basketball, that kind of continuous strapping technique. Is one better than the other one? I just find that I can probably bespoke it a little bit better and almost sort of add or take things off as much as I need, really. So hopefully that answers that. If you wanted to put a link of the technique into the chat group, then I'll probably have a better idea actually in terms of that, but hopefully that answers that question. Helen's just dropped in. I have a client with a 14-month-old calf tear, still struggling with it. Would K-tape be useful to help with the fear of it going again as trying to increase their activity again? I think it's a really important balance to make sure that we've got all the physical qualities back. So it might be that we have restored strength, but have we restored it in the correct ranges? Have we restored the capacity in that calf? Yeah, is that the gastroc bias? Is it the soleus bias? When we think about how much load and force is required through that soleus, it's massive. So we have to go a lot heavier than what you would probably imagine when we think about running. You're probably looking at up to around 10 to 12 times body weight being required of force coming through that calf. So have you necessarily prepared them as well as you could do with the strength elements. Have they got any restrictions in and around that ankle, subtalar joints, talar crural joints, etc.? What's that big toe doing? If the big toe's not working very well and we can't utilize that windlass mechanism, there's going to be more load going up through the chain and through the calf. You might also want to have a little think about the neural side of things. Is there anything neural going on? Is there some old scar tissue that's in there? Um, so once you've developed all of that, K-tape's definitely a really good option that will give them an extra bit of feedback. So put it on stretch. Sometimes I'll often add a horizontal strip as well, just to kind of almost pucker up the calf, give them a little bit more of a boost of that sensory input. And that can be really, really useful. It gives them more awareness of where that calf is. As the tape starts to tension into some of those eccentric dorsiflex positions, before they then push off. Again, they're going to get a bit more tactile input from the tape, and then it's therefore hopefully going to stop them going into those vulnerable ranges. So I think it can work fantastically. It's not the absolute be all and end all. Taping can be an unbelievably useful adjunct to add into the mix. But again, I would always make sure that they've got the physical qualities through that rehab process before you potentially sort of just box them up with tape, if that makes sense. I'm sure you've done all the other bits as well. Zachariah, for the anchors, is the tanned zinc oxide better for anchors, or can you use the standard white zinc oxide, or will that affect anything? Yeah, good question. So they are exactly the same in terms of they fall under the umbrella of zinc oxide, if it's the same tape that I'm thinking of. So they're non-rigid. The Tiger Tan is just a better quality product. So what we found with some of our athletes and us as physios and therapists is that the feedback is that the brown tape or the Tiger Tan tape is just a better quality. It's a bit like having an Egyptian cotton bed sheet that has 1,000 sort of on the knit count, if you like, or thread count versus something that's maybe sort of like a 400, 500 thread count, really. So it's just a better quality product. In terms of what it does, it's often a little bit stickier. It's a bit more tactile, so it'll stick to the skin a bit better. But in terms of what the aim of it is, it's exactly the same. So you're really with an anchor just trying to provide an area for the tape to stick to other tape if you possibly can, just because it'll get a bit more purchase and won't peel off the skin quite as well. That makes sense. But yeah, you could use almost anything really in and around as an anchor. So you could use EAB, you could use Hyperfix, you could use the Taillight stretchy stuff. Again, just if you're going circumferential, just be a bit careful that you're not creating that little muffin top on the top of the tape where you're pulling the skin so tight that it kind of overhangs, because it's probably going to start changing color, getting pins and needles, just feeling pretty uncomfortable when they contract the muscles around that area. Pallavi, is it recommended to use rigid tape for every practice session or just the match day? This is for a weightlifter having dorsal wrist pain since 4 months. Absolutely not. So it depends on what you're seeing really day to day. So we have some athletes who will not have had any taping at all during any of their training sessions for years and years, but it is just tradition that they will want that affected area taped for match day. And I think some of that is just a large psychological aspects. If they've had injuries before, they don't really want to go through the process. They know how long it takes. They know how miserable it is sometimes to fall into rehab and not be doing the sport that they love on a regular basis. So we've had that with our Olympic athletes a lot. We've gone through more tape than ever in probably the 3 months before the Olympics, because everybody's taping little niggles and grumbles just to try not to pick up any little things that might impact their performance, impact their training. And I think a lot of it's just a bit like a crutch that they're using, to be honest. So in terms of what they require, it might be that you're doing something quite light during training sessions where there's less risk, and then go for a heavier strapping on a competition day or a match day. But it totally depends. And in terms of your weightlifter having dorsal wrist pain for 4 months, there may be something going on in there if it's been going on for that long. I do find that wrists, if they are lifting, will potentially continue to flare themselves up. So sometimes it's you add tape, protect whatever tissue it is, but then in the background you're doing all of the rehab and all the extras and all the work-ons to make sure that they have the physical qualities. So then when you add the tape, it's not that it's a reliance on the tape, it's like an extra layer of protection. Zachariah again, when taping to test if it's too tight, would you test for capillary refill? Yes, I definitely would. So I'd test everybody, fingers and toes, just give them a squeeze onto that nail bed, see what's going on. If you're unsure, usually what they'll describe is pins and needles, or it just feels too tight. They may be changing color in and around that area. If any of those things are happening, you're going to have to take the tape off, aren't you? Or just layer it off bit by bit. And that's why sometimes having individual strips on rather than a continuation of tape all the way around can be a little bit better, because you're sort of almost just taking a layer off at a time. Things that may also go, you might find that their dorsalis pedis pulse tends to go. You might find that if you've done a shoulder or an elbow, you might lose your radial pulse, or it might become a bit faint. Again, if it is changing anything from a neurovascular perspective, you can't leave that on. You have to kind of unlayer it until they're at a position where they feel pretty comfortable and there isn't any irritation from there. Cool. Has anyone else got any questions that you want to fire at me? I'm very happy to answer anything. There are, as I sort of mentioned in the presentation, if you did want to check out the sort of full taping course that's on the Grow Physio Academy, you can do that whenever. It does have a lot of really nice quickened up versions. So it does have a lot of the quick reference guides of every taping technique that's in here, plus a whole load more of them. So if you are in clinic and you just think, oh, I can't quite remember how to strap a thumb, you can click on that in the Grow Physio Academy whenever you want. And it will just give you a nice quick 30-second demo and reminder as to what you got to do. So yeah, whether it's the night before, like I used to do, and kind of go, oh, how am I going to strap this and how am I going to strap that? You could go on there and within sort of 2 or 3 minutes be able to sort of pick up all the techniques that you might require. Any other questions, guys? Are we ready to wrap up for the evening? Give me another 30 seconds. Again, just a massive thank you from me for everyone for tuning in. And yes, spending your evening with me. If there is any questions, my email was on there, steve@growphysioacademy.com. So yeah, any queries, questions that you didn't feel brave enough to ask now, or you sort of think about later on after rewatching this, then by all means get in touch. Love to hear from you. There's loads of people using the academy, so lots and lots of members and community sort of stuff where people dot in questions and then just kind of answer them. So a lot of these little things that we help each other out with. So it's not all just me and my Geordie accent witchering on after a day in clinic in the judo worlds like I was today. But yeah, on that note, I'll wrap up. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you all so much again, and hope to see you all potentially at the next webinar, which is on Wednesday next week, all around ankle injuries. So how to perform some of the tests that you would do to diagnose a lateral ankle injury, what that means in terms of timescales, how you communicate that with the athlete, and then also once you've got that diagnosis, how you plan out the rehab. And then I've actually got a real athlete who was a elite rugby player going through that journey with a syndesmosis injury. So not the sort of inversion injury. This one was the higher ankle sprain. So a bit more complex, a little bit more different. Not something that we see a huge amount of, but there's a big difference between your inversion sprain injuries and the sort of syndesmotic injuries that you get a bit higher up. So totally different approaches. So you'll get to see their journey. And again, if you want to have a little look at that, then drop me an email, or you can have a little look on my socials. I think it's in my bio. You can have a little click on there. All right, folks. Well, on that note, have a good evening, and I'll hopefully catch you guys soon. All the best.